The late afternoon sun, a buttery yellow, filtered through the leaves of the ancient oak, dappling the vibrant petals of the rose garden. 5-year-old Lily, her hair the color of spun honey, giggled as her father, a strong but gentle man, pretended to be a giant bumblebee, chasing her through the fragrant aisles. "Buzz, buzz, little flower," he rumbled, his laughter echoing the joy in her own heart. Lily's tiny feet, clad in worn, red Wellington boots, barely touched the soft earth as she darted between the bushes, the sweet scent of roses clinging to her like a second skin. Her mother, a vision in a sundress the color of a summer sky, sat on a wrought iron bench, a half-finished embroidery hoop resting on her lap. She smiled, a warm, knowing smile that always reached her eyes as she watched her daughter and husband. "Don't tire her out too much, darling," she called out, her voice a melody that always soothed Lily. "Never," her father declared, scooping Lily into his arms. She shrieked with delight, her arms wrapping around his neck. He spun her gently, the world a blur of pink and green, until they both tumbled onto the plush grass, breathless and happy. This was Lily's world, a world woven with the threads of laughter and sunshine, anchored by the cozy 2-story house that stood sentinel at the edge of the garden. Its painted white clapboard walls gleamed in the sunlight, framed by climbing ivy and window boxes overflowing with geraniums. Inside, the house held the comforting smell of baking bread and old books, a symphony of domestic bliss. But it was the garden, her mother's pride and joy, that truly captured Lily's imagination. Specifically, it was the pink roses. Not just any pink, but a spectrum of hues, from the delicate blush of the ballerina variety to the vibrant fuchsia of the Queen Elizabeth. They climbed trellises, spilled from terracotta pots, and formed fragrant hedges that separated their property from the next. Lily knew each bush by heart, recognizing the subtle differences in their thorns, the delicate curl of their petals. She believed they whispered secrets to her, tales of dewdrop mornings and sleepy sunsets. "Mommy, look!" Lily exclaimed, scrambling up and presenting a perfectly formed bloom, its petals still dewy. "This one just opened." Her mother took the rose, inhaling its perfume. "It's beautiful, sweet pea, just like you." She tucked it gently behind Lily's ear, the soft petals brushing against her cheek. Lily beamed. "I love our garden. I love our house. And I love you and Daddy more than all the roses in the whole wide world." She threw her arms around her mother's neck, a fierce, innocent embrace. Her father joined them, sitting cross-legged on the grass, his large hand gently stroking Lily's hair. "And we love you, our little rosebud, more than words can say." His eyes, usually twinkling with mischief, held a profound tenderness that made Lily feel safe and cherished. They spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable silence, punctuated by the occasional chirping of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. Lily drew stick figures in the dirt with a twig. Her parents watched her, their expressions serene. This was their sanctuary, a haven of simple joys and unconditional love. Lily knew, deep in her small heart, that this was what happiness felt like, a warm, enveloping blanket of family and belonging. She watched a ladybug crawl across her father's outstretched hand, its tiny legs navigating the landscape of his skin. A soft breeze stirred the leaves of the oak, rustling through the rose bushes, making them sway as if in a gentle dance. The world, in that moment, was perfect. As dusk began to paint the sky with hues of lavender and orange, her mother clapped her hands softly. "Time for supper, my little flower." Lily sighed contentedly, allowing her father to lift her effortlessly. As they walked towards the house, hand in hand, Lily glanced back at the rose garden, now bathed in the soft, fading light. The pink roses seemed to glow, almost alive, guardians of their happy home. She squeezed her mother's hand, a silent promise to cherish these moments forever, oblivious to the storm clouds gathering on the horizon, unseen and unheard, waiting to engulf her idyllic world. She imagined the roses sleeping, their petals folded in sweet dreams, just as she would soon be, cradled in the warmth of her parents' love. She knew nothing of the legal documents tucked away in her father's study, nor the distant relatives with calculating eyes. For now there was only the scent of roses and the comforting presence of her beloved family. A trip to the stars. The scent of freshly baked apple pie usually filled the air on Saturday mornings, but today it was replaced by the crisp, metallic tang of an open suitcase and the faint aroma of her father's shaving cream. Lily stood on the worn porch swing, her small hand gripping the rough twine, watching her parents load their bags into the polished black car. Her mother, her hair pulled back in a neat bun, turned and offered a bright, reassuring smile. "Now you be a good girl for Mrs. Gable, sweet pea. We won't be gone long, just a quick trip." Her father, already behind the wheel, gave a cheerful honk. "Think of it as an adventure, Lilybug. We're off to see the world, and we'll bring you back the grandest stories you ever did hear." Lily nodded, a little knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. She always felt a pang when they left, even for short visits to town. But this felt different. The suitcases were bigger, their smiles a little too wide, a touch of something she couldn't quite name lingering in their eyes. She waved, a small, tentative motion, as the car pulled away, kicking up a swirl of dust on the gravel drive. She watched until it was a tiny speck on the horizon, then a memory, swallowed by the winding road and the dense green of the distant woods. The silence that followed felt vast and sudden, like a curtain dropping on a vibrant play. Mrs. Gable, her kindly face creased with a familiar warmth, emerged from the kitchen, a plate of her famous gingerbread cookies in hand. "Come now, dearie. Your parents will be back before you know it. Let's make ourselves a fort in the living room, shall we?" Days folded into weeks, each one a mirror of the last. Mrs. Gable was a wonderful companion, her stories of mythical beasts and far-off lands a soothing balm to Lily's growing unease. They tended the rose garden, Lily carefully pruning the delicate petals, missing her mother's gentle guidance. She picked up fallen leaves, marveling at their intricate veins, wishing her father were there to explain the science behind their autumn colors. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and soft purples, Lily would sit on the porch swing, just as she had that first Saturday, her eyes scanning the road for the familiar black car. Each evening, the road remained empty. The vivid memory of her parents' smiles began to fray at the edges, replaced by a dull ache in her chest. "Mrs. Barbaser's potes." Gable's comforting words grew quieter, her own gaze often lingering on the empty driveway, a profound sadness settling around her like a heavy cloak. Lily, though young, sensed the shift. The air in the house, once filled with the echoes of laughter, now held a hushed solemnity. One crisp afternoon, as goldenrod bloomed riotously by the fence and the air carried the first whisper of winter, Mrs. Gable sat Lily down on the plush velvet sofa. The aroma of chamomile tea, usually so comforting, now seemed to carry a hint of something bitter. Mrs. Gable took Lily's small hands in her own, her touch gentle but firm. Her eyes, usually sparkling with good humor, were clouded with unshed tears. "Lily, my sweet child," she began, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Your parents, they've gone on a very, very long trip." Lily's heart gave a hopeful flutter. "Are they coming home soon?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Mrs. Gable stroked Lily's hair, her gaze drifting to the window, where a single crimson rose bloomed defiantly against the chill. "They're not coming back, dear one. Not in the way we usually think of it." She paused, a deep breath shuddering through her. "They've gone to live in the stars, Lily. They're watching over you from up there, shining brightly, just like the evening star." The words hung in the air, heavy and confusing. Live in the stars? Lily pictured her parents, tiny figures floating amidst the glittering constellations, far beyond the reach of any car or road. It sounded beautiful, like one of Mrs. Gable's stories, but it didn't feel like a story. It felt like an empty space in her heart, a cold, hard knot that had replaced the hopeful flutter. She looked at Mrs. Gable, searching for an explanation, for a way to untangle the sudden, bewildering sadness. But Mrs. Gable's face offered only profound sorrow and a quiet, devastating finality. The world, which had once felt so solid and predictable, now seemed to tilt on its axis, leaving Lily adrift in a sea of unspoken grief. The rose garden, the familiar porch swing, even the scent of chamomile tea. Everything now carried a new, melancholic resonance. Aunt Clara's tight hugs, gravel gritted beneath tires, an abrasive announcement of arrivals that, today, struck Lily as particularly bleak. From her window seat perch, she observed a dark sedan glide up the drive, its polished exterior mirroring the pale autumn sky in a warped, unsettling reflection. A familiar constriction tightened in her stomach, a post-accident reflex. Every visitor now heralded an unnamed disquiet. The car doors opened. Out stepped Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob. Clara, a vibrant blur of patterned scarves and clinking bracelets, radiated an almost unnerving cheer. Her smile stretched wide, pulling at the corners of her eyes, making them glint with an unsettling brightness. Bob, a quiet man whose forehead bore a perpetual furrow, trailed behind, a small, worn suitcase looking incongruous in his large hands. Lily's breath caught. Aunt Clara's customary warmth felt today like a newly honed blade. Pushing off the window seat, Lily's small frame seemed to shrink further as she moved toward the front door. Clara met her in the hall, arms already outstretched. "Oh, my sweet Lilybug," she exclaimed, her voice a shade too loud, too effusive for the hushed house. Lily was engulfed in an embrace that felt less like comfort and more like a vice. Aunt Clara exuded expensive perfume, a vaguely floral essence that usually signified celebration but now felt suffocating. The hard press of her aunt's rings dug into Lily's back, stealing her breath. "Such a brave little soldier, aren't you?" Clara murmured, pulling back just enough to hold Lily at arm's length. Her hands gripped Lily's shoulders with surprising strength. Her gaze swept over Lily's face, lingered on her slightly swollen eyes, then darted around the hallway, a quick, appraising sweep, like a merchant assessing wares. Meanwhile, Uncle Bob set the suitcase down with a soft thud and offered a hesitant pat to Lily's hair. His smile, though genuine, was tinged with a visible sadness that sparked a fleeting connection in Lily. But then Aunt Clara's voice sliced through the quiet. "Now, darling," she began, her tone shifting, softening into a theatrical whisper that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knelt, silk skirt rustling, bringing her face level with Lily's. The perfume intensified, pricking Lily's nose. "We have some very important news for you, my precious girl." Lily's heart began to drum against her ribs. She looked from Aunt Clara's overly sweet smile to Uncle Bob's downcast eyes, a flicker of apprehension coiling in her gut. She knew, with a child's instinctive clarity, that whatever was coming wasn't good. Aunt Clara took both of Lily's small hands in her own, her grip firm. "Your wonderful parents, bless their souls, always wanted you to be safe and loved. And now, with them gone," her voice wavered dramatically, though her eyes remained dry and fixed on Lily's face. "Uncle Bob and I have decided that the very best place for you to be is with us." Lily's world tilted. "With you?" she whispered, the words barely audible. Her gaze darted to the familiar antique clock on the mantelpiece, to the framed photograph of her parents smiling from the side table, to the sunlight streaming through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. This was her home. Her roses, still needing pruning in the garden, waited outside. Her books lined the shelves, her unfinished drawing lay on the kitchen table. Aunt Clara nodded, her smile tightening if anything. "Yes, sweet pea, you'll come live with us. We have a lovely spare room, just waiting for your little touch. And we'll have so much fun, won't we, Bob?" She nudged Uncle Bob with her elbow, and he offered a weak, non-committal grunt. "It's for the best, Lilybug," Aunt Clara continued, her grip on Lily's hands becoming almost painful. "A big house like this, well, it's far too much for a little girl on her own, and we want to take care of you, just like your mummy and daddy would have wanted." The words felt like a cold stone dropping into Lily's chest. Her home. Her sanctuary. The place imbued with every memory of laughter and whispered bedtime stories. It was being wrestled from her, not with a roar, but with a suffocating, perfume-laden hug, and a smile that promised comfort while delivering displacement. She blinked, fighting back the sudden sting in her eyes, struggling to comprehend the seismic shift in her world, ushered in by Aunt Clara's tight embrace and strained, beaming face. A new, small room. Lily's small suitcase, despite its meager contents, felt impossibly heavy in her grip. Inside, a handful of dresses, a well-loved teddy bear, and a single carefully pressed rose from her own garden lay nestled. Her eyes, swollen and tear-streaked, lingered on the familiar landscape beyond her window. The climbing roses, ablaze with blossoms, seemed to offer a final farewell, their deep crimson petals a poignant mirror to her aching heart. She inhaled deeply, drawing in the last wisps of their sweet fragrance, a scent synonymous with home, family, everything she'd lost. With a final, wistful gaze at the sun-drenched blooms, a silent vow to return, she closed the door behind her. The journey to Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob's unfurled in a blur of passing fields and anonymous towns. Aunt Clara, perched beside her, would periodically turn, her smile a little too bright, a little too forced, as she offered hollow reassurance. "It's a lovely big house, Lily dear," she'd chirped, her voice unconvincingly cheerful. "Plenty of room for everyone. You'll be very comfortable." Lily merely nodded, clutching her teddy bear tighter, her small, anxious face reflected in the car's plastic window. The house, when they finally crunched into the gravel driveway, presented itself as a grand, imposing Victorian, adorned with intricate gingerbread trim. Spacious, yes, but it utterly lacked the inviting warmth of her former dwelling. Aunt Clara, a whirlwind of activity, bustled out, already directing Uncle Bob to retrieve their luggage. "Welcome, welcome," she exclaimed, her outstretched arms offering a brief, almost perfunctory embrace. "Come in, Lily dear, let's get you settled." Inside, the air hung thick with the medicinal tang of lemon pledge, overlaid with a vague floral scent, a stark departure from the comforting aromas of baking bread or fresh earth she associated with home. Polished floors gleamed, reflecting the ornate chandeliers that dangled from soaring ceilings. Aunt Clara guided her down a long, dimly lit corridor, past a series of closed doors. "We've put you in a very cozy room," she declared, her smile fixed. At the very end of the hall, she pushed open a door. The room was undeniably cramped. It felt less like a private sanctuary and more like an afterthought, tucked into the house's deepest recess. A single bed, draped in a faded floral quilt, dominated the space. A narrow chest of drawers, its surface bare, stood against one wall. But it was the absence of a window that truly struck Lily. No gentle morning light, no expansive sky, no glimpse of verdant green. The air felt heavy, stagnant, a stark contrast to the open, airy expanse of her old room. "There you are," Aunt Clara said, her voice softening marginally, though still devoid of genuine warmth. "We thought it would be best, away from all the hustle and bustle." She gestured vaguely. "You can unpack later. Dinner will be at 6. With a quick, perfunctory pat on Lily's shoulder, she vanished, leaving Lily alone in the small, oppressive silence. Lily carefully set down her suitcase. The pressed rose within felt like an artifact from a bygone era. She gravitated to the wall where a window should have been, her fingers tracing the smooth, unyielding plaster. The room's silence pressed in, magnifying the hollow ache in her chest. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no scent of damp earth after a summer rain, only the faint, distant hum of the house and the echoing emptiness of her own sorrow. She sank onto the edge of the bed, the faded quilt rough beneath her fingers. This was not home. This held no resemblance to home. And for the first time since her parents' passing, the stubborn flicker of hope within her began to wane, extinguished by a cold, sharp loneliness. She yearned for her roses, their wild beauty, their thorny embrace, their silent comfort. And she missed the window that had framed them, a window that had always promised the dawn of a new day, even through the darkest hours. Here, there was only a wall, grown-up papers, and big trucks. Aunt Clara's lavender soap, its slightly cloying perfume, a constant presence, permeated the small cottage. Lily, perched on the braided rug, meticulously arranged a bounty of pine cones gathered from the woods. From the kitchen, the murmur of Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob's voices, punctuated by the delicate clinking of teacups, reached her. Usually, their hushed conversations revolved around the weather or local gossip. But today, the words drifting into the living room felt heavier, imbued with an unfamiliar gravity. Quote. Grown-up papers, Aunt Clara intoned, her voice saccharine even by her standards. Such red tape. And the house, Bob? It just needs so much fixing. A veritable money pit, Uncle Bob grunted. It was a fine house, always was. Well, it's not now, Aunt Clara snapped, a rare sharpness in her tone. The roof alone, don't even get me started. And the plumbing. Honestly, I don't know how Lily's parents lived there all those years. So rustic. A dramatic sigh followed. It's almost a mercy, really, that we have to sell it. For the estate, you know, to cover expenses. Lily paused, a smooth, dark pine cone slipping from her fingers. Her house. The one with the sprawling rose garden and the creaky floorboards that hummed lullabies when the wind blew just right. The one where Mama used to read stories by the crackling fireplace. A strange, tight knot formed in her stomach. She didn't grasp grown-up papers or money pits, but she understood Aunt Clara's words painted her home as unwelcome, unwanted. Later that afternoon, Aunt Clara announced they were going into town for some bits and bobs. Still chilled by the morning's conversation, Lily climbed into the back seat of the Ford. The familiar landscape blurred past, a comforting kaleidoscope. As they rounded the bend leading to her old street, her breath hitched. Parked directly in front of her home, its bright yellow paint, a jarring contrast to the familiar gray stone, was a colossal truck. Its back was open, a gaping maw. What's that? Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Aunt Clara cast a fleeting, unreadable glance over her shoulder. Oh, that! Just some movers. Clearing things out. You know, for the new owners. New owners? The word struck Lily with the force of a physical blow. She pressed her face against the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Two men in overalls were carrying items out the front door, things unmistakably hers. A stack of her father's old fishing magazines, then a box filled with the mismatched teacups Mama cherished. Each item felt like a tiny piece of her past being torn away. Then she saw it. Her rocking chair. The one Papa had carved for her first birthday, its smooth, worn wood, polished by years of quiet companionship. It had sat in her bedroom, a silent confidant through countless whispered secrets and tearful nights. One of the men, a burly figure with a red bandana, hoisted it onto his shoulder, its familiar silhouette dwarfed by his frame. Lily watched as he walked it to the truck, carefully but firmly, and placed it inside. The yellow truck swallowed it whole. A hot, prickling sensation rose behind her eyes. It wasn't just the chair. It was the chilling finality of it. The house, the garden, her belongings, they were all being taken, piece by agonizing piece, without a word to her. A new ache, deeper and sharper than the grief she'd felt for her parents, settled in her chest. It was the ache of being forgotten, of watching her world dismantle before her very eyes, utterly helpless. The truck's engine rumbled to life, a low growl that seemed to mock her silent tears as Aunt Clara drove past, never slowing, never looking back. The secret conversation. The heavy, cloying scent of stale potpourri, sickeningly sweet, made Lily's nose prickle. She perched on the edge of the plush velvet armchair, its springs groaning in protest under her slight frame, her gaze fixed on Aunt Clara delicately sipping tea from a china cup. The afternoon sun, usually a welcome presence, felt harsh, cutting through the lace curtains to illuminate dust motes dancing in the stillness. Aunt Clara, Lily began, her voice a fragile whisper. About my house. Aunt Clara set her cup down with a soft clink, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the saucer. A brittle smile, devoid of warmth in her eyes, stretched across her lips. Oh, darling, that old place. It's simply too much, isn't it? All those memories, you know. Far too upsetting for a sensitive girl like you. Lily's stomach clenched. The house wasn't just an old place. It was a repository of her life, brimming with her parents, laughter, the comforting aroma of her mother's baking, the quiet solace of her father's study. Every rosebush in the garden, every worn floorboard, held a fragment of her soul. But where would I live? Aunt Clara dismissed the question with a wave of a hand adorned with sparkling rings. Nonsense, sweet pea. You're perfectly fine here with us. We'll make a lovely room for you, right next to the guest bath. And the house, well, it needs to be sold. It's simply the most practical solution. All that upkeep, you see, and taxes. She shuddered daintily, as if the mere mention were offensive. A cold dread, heavy and suffocating, settled in Lily's chest. Practical solution. The phrase echoed hollowly, devoid of any genuine concern. Her eyes traced the intricate patterns on the Persian rug as a knot of confusion and sorrow tightened within her. It wasn't about practicality. It was something else, an unspoken truth that resonated deep in her bones. She offered a mute nod, words catching like thorns in her throat. Later that evening, a sliver of moonlight sliced across the hallway, guiding Lily toward the kitchen for a drink. A low murmur of voices drifted from the study, a room usually reserved for hushed phone calls and Uncle Bob's endless paperwork. A sharp, insistent curiosity tugged at her. She paused just outside the door, the wood cool against her cheek, and listened. Ridiculous, Bob. Absolutely ridiculous. Aunt Clara's voice, usually so sweet and modulated, was edged with an unfamiliar sharpness. All those sentimental attachments. Honestly, the girl is so dramatic, as if she even remembers half of what was in that old place. Uncle Bob's gruff voice rumbled in response. She's just a child, Clara. And it was her home. Maybe we should just... No, maybe's about it. Aunt Clara cut him off, her tone unyielding. The will was quite clear. Everything to us for her care. And her care, my dear husband, does not involve maintaining a crumbling old house full of dusty relics. Besides, think of the profit. A prime location like that will be set for years. Lily's breath hitched. A sudden icy wave of dread washed over her, leaving her trembling. Everything to us. Not to her. Not for her. Not for her future. For them. The words hammered against her eardrums, each syllable a grim confirmation of her deepest, most unsettling fears. And the bank accounts? Are they all transferred? Aunt Clara's voice softened, tinged with almost giddy excitement. All those funds, just sitting there. It's practically a gold mine, Bob. A gold mine. A quiet rustle followed, perhaps Uncle Bob shuffling papers. Yes, it's all in order. Took a bit of maneuvering, but everything's legally ours now. For her benefit, of course. The last part was mumbled, an almost imperceptible afterthought, a flimsy justification that dissolved into the air. Lily pressed a hand against her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her heart pounded a frantic drum against her ribs. The cloying sweetness of the potpourri, the brittle smile, the casual dismissal of her home, it all coalesced into a chilling realization. It wasn't about practicality or her well-being. It was about the money, all of it. Her parents' legacy, their careful provisions for her future, now belonged to Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob. The warmth of the house, the scent of roses, the very fabric of her life, felt ripped away, piece by painful piece. A profound sense of betrayal washed over her, leaving her utterly alone in the silent, moonlit hallway. Daddy's hidden letter. The grand, silent house often felt oppressive, its emptiness a weight heavier than the dusty velvet that veiled the drawing-room windows. Lily, a slender girl with eyes like summer forget-me-nots, usually sought refuge in the sun-drenched garden, a riot of roses her mother had cherished. But today, even their vivid blush offered scant comfort. A cold knot of apprehension cinched in her chest. Aunt Beatrice and Uncle Arthur's hushed exchanges, the constant veiled references to financial difficulties, and the subtle, steady disappearance of her belongings had congealed into a dull, persistent ache. She yearned for her daddy's booming laughter, her mummy's gentle humming, the familiar warmth of their presence. Now, only an echoing chasm remained where they once had been. Today, however, Aunt Beatrice had proposed a diversion. "Let's play hide-and-seek, Lilybug," she'd trilled, a a forced buoyancy in her tone. "You hide, and I'll count to 100. It was a rare invitation, and Lily, despite her unease, grasped at the fleeting promise of normalcy. She scampered up the protesting attic stairs, the mingled scents of aged wood and long-forgotten things filling her nostrils. Dust motes danced in the sparse shafts of light, piercing the grimy panes, illuminating a landscape of furniture shrouded in white, like slumbering behemoths. She tiptoed past an antique rocking horse, its painted gaze vacant, and a stack of leather-bound volumes redolent of vanilla and decades. Her usual sanctuary was behind the colossal, tarnished grandfather clock, but today, an indefinable impulse, a faint whisper in her mind's quiet corners, drew her towards an unexplored recess. Tucked behind a neglected tapestry chest stood a small, unassuming wooden box. It possessed no embellishment, merely plain, unvarnished pine, softened by years of accumulated dust and disuse. Curiosity, a potent antidote to her pervasive sorrow, tugged at her. She reached for the box, her small fingers tracing the faint grain of the wood. It was surprisingly heavy. As she lifted the lid, a puff of cedar-scented air unfurled. Inside, nestled amongst dried lavender sprigs, lay a single folded letter, its paper brittle and yellowed with age. Her heart gave a sudden lurch. Her daddy's unmistakable handwriting adorned the front, bold and flowing, simply addressed. "For my Lilybug, when you're old enough to understand." Her breath hitched. Old enough to understand what? Her daddy had always been so straightforward, so transparent. Why a hidden message? Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded it, the paper crackling softly. "My dearest Lilybug, if you are reading this, then I am no longer here to tell you myself, and for that, my heart aches. But I want you to know the truth, a truth that others might try to obscure. This house, our beautiful home with its sprawling gardens and the roses you love so much, is yours. It always has been, and always will be. Your mother and I made sure of it. We put everything in a trust, an ironclad protection for you, our precious daughter. I know there will be difficult times, and perhaps even people who try to convince you otherwise. They might speak of debts, of necessary sales, of anything to try and seize what is rightfully yours. Do not believe them, Lily. Seek out Mr. Abernathy at the old law firm downtown, the one with the big oak tree outside. He holds all the documents, all the proof. He will guide you. Remember the strength within you, my little Rose. Remember the love we poured into these walls, into your life. Never let anyone diminish your spirit or take what is yours. This house is your legacy, your sanctuary. It holds our memories, our love, and your future. I love you more than words can say. Your Daddy." Lily reread the letter, her eyes blurring. A tremor ran through her small frame, not of fear, but of a dawning, terrible clarity. The hushed conversations, the vanishing possessions, Aunt Beatrice's forced smiles. It all coalesced, forming a chilling mosaic. They weren't protecting her. They were plundering from her. A fierce, unfamiliar resolve ignited within her, a tiny spark in the vast, empty space of her grief. Her daddy's words, a voice from beyond the grave, were a lifeline, a compass. She clutched the letter to her chest, the mingled scents of cedar and dried lavender, a comforting echo of his presence. The house wasn't just a house. It was a promise, a fortress built of love, and she wouldn't let anyone steal it. Mrs. Gable's kind smile. The crisp morning air carried the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke as Lily clutched the folded letter. Its edges were soft from her anxious handling, a tangible link to her daddy's strong, familiar hand. She walked with a quiet determination, her small boots crunching on the gravel path that led to Mrs. Gable's cottage. Aunt Clara had sent her, not with any genuine concern, but with a dismissive wave and a hurried instruction to take that paper to Mrs. Gable. She'll know what to do. The disdain in Aunt Clara's voice, for anything that wasn't directly related to her own comfort, had been palpable. Mrs. Gable's cottage was a haven of order and calm, even from the outside. Rose bushes, heavy with late-season blooms, climbed the trellises, their petals a vibrant tapestry against the whitewashed walls. Lily paused for a moment, tracing the velvety curve of a deep crimson rose with her fingertip, a momentary solace before she lifted her hand to knock. The door opened almost immediately, revealing Mrs. Gable's familiar, comforting presence. Her silver hair was pulled back neatly, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, crinkled at the corners when she saw Lily. "Well, good morning, dear Lily. What brings you out so early?" Her voice was gentle, a stark contrast to the sharp tones that often echoed in Aunt Clara's house. Lily held out the letter, her small hand trembling slightly. "Aunt Clara said," she said, "to bring this to you, Mrs. Gable. It's from my daddy." Mrs. Gable's smile softened further, a hint of sorrow touching her features as she took the envelope. She knew, as did most of the village, the tragedy that had befallen Lily's parents. "Come in, child. Don't stand out in the chill." The cottage interior was warm and smelled faintly of lavender and old books. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Mrs. Gable settled into a worn armchair by the window, motioning for Lily to take the stool opposite. The light caught the fine lines around her eyes as she unfolded the letter with careful precision. Lily watched her, her heart a small, anxious bird fluttering in her chest. She couldn't read the looping script herself, but she knew the weight of it, the unspoken promises and fears it contained. Mrs. Gable's expression remained unreadable as her eyes tracked across the page. Her brow furrowed slightly at one point, then smoothed. Lily noticed the way her lips pressed together, a small, involuntary movement of concentration. The silence in the room stretched, punctuated only by the soft rustle of the paper and the crackle of the fire. Lily's gaze drifted to a small porcelain figurine on the mantelpiece, a shepherdess with a lamb at her feet, finding a momentary distraction in its delicate beauty. She wondered what her daddy had written, what secrets or instructions the words held. She hoped they were good things, things that would make Aunt Clara finally look at her with something other than exasperation. Finally, Mrs. Gable lowered the letter, folding it slowly and deliberately. She didn't speak for a moment, her gaze fixed on the glowing embers in the hearth. Lily held her breath, waiting. Then Mrs. Gable turned her warm gaze back to Lily, and a kind smile, full of genuine warmth and understanding, bloomed on her face. It reached her eyes, chasing away the shadow of concern that had briefly touched them. "This is a very important letter, Lily," Mrs. Gable said, her voice soft but firm. "Your daddy was a very wise man. He wanted to make sure you were taken care of." She placed the letter gently on her lap, covering it with her hand as if to protect its contents. "He wrote that the house and the land and, well, everything is yours. He wrote it all down very clearly." Lily blinked, her mind grappling with the words. "Mine?" She thought of the little cottage, the sprawling rose garden, the fields where her daddy had toiled. It felt too big, too important for her. Mrs. Gable leaned forward, her smile unwavering. "Aunt Clara, she might have some different ideas, dear, but your daddy's wishes are very plain, and they are law. You mustn't worry." She reached out, her hand gently covering Lily's small, cold one. Her touch was reassuring, solid. "I'll make sure everything is sorted out, Lily, every last detail. You can count on me. We'll show them." Lily looked into Mrs. Gable's steady, kind eyes, and a fragile sense of hope, like a tiny shoot pushing through hard ground, began to unfurl within her. She didn't fully understand the complexities of what Mrs. Gable was saying, but she understood the promise in her voice, the sincerity in her smile. For the first time since her parents had passed, Lily felt a glimmer of certainty, a belief that perhaps, just perhaps, everything would be all right. Home and new roses. The scent of stale potpourri and Aunt Clara's cloying perfume hung heavy in the air of the living room. Mrs. Gable, a formidable figure in her sensible tweed suit, sat opposite Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob, her hands clasped calmly in her lap. Lily, perched nervously on a stool in the hallway, could only hear snippets, but the tone of Mrs. Gable's voice was unmistakable, firm, unwavering, ... Documents clearly state. Mrs. Gable's voice cut through the silence. that the property and all assets were to be held in trust for Lily until her 18th birthday, with Aunt Clara and Uncle Bob acting as temporary guardians, not owners. Aunt Clara's usually smooth face was a mask of disbelief, her perfect blonde coiffure seeming to wilt slightly. But we were simply following what we thought was best, she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. Uncle Bob, usually boisterous, looked as though he'd seen a ghost, his face pale and his hands fidgeting with the tassels on the armchair. Best for whom, Clara? Mrs. Gable's voice was devoid of accusation, yet it carried an undeniable weight. The explicit instructions in Mr. and Mrs. Evans's will were for Lily's welfare, not for a lavish extension on your own home, nor for the sale of family heirlooms. Lily heard a sharp intake of breath from Aunt Clara. Heirlooms? What heirlooms? Her voice rose in pitch, betraying a crack in her carefully constructed facade. The antique porcelain doll collection, the sterling silver tea set, the landscape painting by Thomas Cole. Mrs. Gable listed calmly, each item a small hammer blow to Aunt Clara's composure. All items that were to remain with Lily, as per her mother's specific wishes. Uncle Bob finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. We thought it was a small misunderstanding. The lawyers, they presented things differently. He gestured vaguely, his eyes darting towards Aunt Clara, who now looked truly cornered. Her usual air of self-assurance had evaporated, replaced by a panicked, hunted expression. The elaborate floral scarf she wore seemed to tighten around her throat. Mrs. Gable merely raised an eyebrow, a gesture that spoke volumes. The law is quite clear, Mr. Henderson, and the implications of misrepresenting a will, particularly involving a minor, are severe. Lily couldn't hear the rest of the conversation directly, but the hushed, urgent tones that followed told their own story. Aunt Clara's protests became weaker, her denials less convincing. Uncle Bob, for his part, seemed to shrink further into the armchair, shoulders hunched. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket that pressed down on everything. Later that afternoon, the car pulled up to Lily's house. Not Aunt Clara's house, but her house. The familiar scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine wafted from the garden. The porch swing, which had been removed, was back in its place, creaking gently in the breeze. As Mrs. Gable unlocked the front door, a wave of relief washed over Lily, so profound it made her knees weak. The house felt emptier, quieter than she remembered, but it was hers. The living room, though stripped of some familiar pieces, still held the echoes of laughter and quiet conversations. Her mother's worn armchair sat by the fireplace, a comforting presence. Mrs. Gable smiled kindly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. It's a fresh start, Lily, and with a little care, we'll make it feel like home again. The next morning, the sun was a warm caress on Lily's face as she stepped into the garden. A box of new rose bushes, their leaves a vibrant green, sat waiting. Mrs. Gable, already clad in gardening gloves, began carefully digging. Your mother loved roses, didn't she? Mrs. Gable asked, her voice soft. Lily nodded, a small smile touching her lips. More than anything, she said they were like love. Beautiful, but sometimes a little thorny if you weren't careful. Together, they worked. Mrs. Gable explained how to gently tease the roots, how to ensure the soil was just right, how to water them properly. Lily plunged her hands into the cool, dark earth, feeling its rich texture, the tiny grains clinging to her skin. The act of planting, of nurturing new life, was profoundly comforting. Each small movement, each careful placement of a root ball felt like an offering, a quiet act of remembrance. As the last rose bush settled into its new home, its delicate buds promising future blooms, Lily felt a profound sense of peace. The sun warmed her back, the gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree, and a robin sang a cheerful melody from a nearby branch. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, she could almost feel her parents' presence beside her, their quiet pride, their unwavering love. It wasn't just new roses she was planting hope, roots reaching deep into the earth, anchoring her once more to the love that had always been her home. The house was hers, yes, But the garden, with its promise of future blossoms, felt like a direct connection to the two people she missed most, a tangible manifestation of their enduring love. The thorny path had led her back to beauty.